First of all, it isn't actually my house. I'm currently house sitting with my girlfriend because the owners of the house, family of my girlfriend, were recently broken into. The house is in a very wealthy suburb in my city. It has a two stories, a basement, and an elevator. We're pretty much just here living while they're away looking after their dogs. We've been staying here for the past week, and some really creepy shit has been going on at night and when I've been alone in the house. I thought I'd share some of the things I've been experiencing on here because I'm not really sure what to do. The first few nights, I was hearing lots of distant noises while in bed, lots of taps and slight banging sounds. I thought nothing of it at first, passing it off as the house selling in and whatnot. However, on the third night, as I was drifting off to sleep, there was a loud enough bang that woke both me and my girlfriend up. The dog went absolutely mad and ran out of the room barking furiously somewhere towards the front of the house. I should probably mention that we are staying in the guest bedroom on the ground level, where the kitchen, living room, and main entrance to the house are. The upstairs floor of the house is where the rest of the bedrooms are. Downstairs consists of a large car garage, a cinema, and other small rooms. The majority of the house's appliances and lights are controlled by an iPad. The loud bang sounded as if a heavy door had just been slammed. We both sat up and looked at each other with shocked expressions on our faces. The dog continued to bark at the front door. I grabbed the iPad and checked to see if there was any lights turned on in the house. There was. Downstairs lights were switched to on. My heart sank into my stomach. The stairs to the basement were the opposite side of the house from the source of the bang sound. Reluctantly, I got up and walked towards the sound of the dog barking, which by then had stopped by the time I got there. The dog just looked at me blankly, and there was no sign of anything unusual. I made my way to the basement stairs at the back half of the house with my girlfriend shadowing cautiously behind me. Nothing. We went back to bed and slept without any further disturbances. The other morning, I was home alone doing a few cleaning jobs around the house. I was using the elevators to travel between floors because, why not? The novelty of it was too much. I entered the elevator and pressed up. The elevator thrusted upwards, but halfway up in between the first and second floor, it suddenly stopped. I pushed on then the locked elevator door, a safety feature to prevent severe injuries, I assume. For the next 2 or 3 minutes, I was stuck in there. I was certain that there was some sort of presence outside the elevator on the ground floor. It was almost as if something was listening for my reaction. Eventually, the elevator jolted back into motion, giving me a slight fright, and continued to ascend. I could have sworn that I heard distant footsteps slowly walking downstairs. At the time, I just shrugged it off to being the sound of the elevator. Just this morning, I was home alone upstairs trying out the drum kit set that was in one of the spare bedrooms. Sitting on the smaller drummer's chair, I had blast banging on the drums and teaching myself how to play particular beats from popular tracks including Everlong, In the Air, and Good Times, Bad Times. But that's not the point. As much fun as I was having, I hit on the tubes, I kept hearing a whisper coming from the other room. I was unable to pinpoint the source of the whisper all over the drumming, so I stopped and I sat listening with my eyes closed for a further noise. Hello? There it was again. I wasn't imagining it. A little high pitched hello, but it wasn't a clear hello. It was sort of muffled and sounded like it was coming from a distance, but at the same time it seemed like it was coming from right beside me. For a few moments, I sat in silence, then sat with my eyes open. Sure enough, I kept hearing the same hello. It was short, sharp, more like a hello, cutting right off at the end. I began to feel ill. Something wasn't right. The helloing continued, and I couldn't locate the source of the whisper. After a long pause of silence, I heard it again. I turned around slowly in the tiny drummer chair. To my horror, the most frightening face I've ever seen was floating right outside the window opposite of me. The face had cartoon-like featured eyes and a wily tooth smile, not unlike Marilyn Manson in Lost Highway. It was truly indescribable and absolutely terrifying to say the least. I left the house straight away and haven't been back since. My theory is that all three instances are linked and that there has been someone living inside the house. I have warned my girlfriend about what I have saw this morning, and she is going to contact her relatives. We're staying at our house tonight. Not that we'll be staying there ever again until what I saw this morning has an explanation. Number 2. Mr. Lane was our math teacher in high school. He didn't stand out in any way, and his lessons weren't particularly interesting. He was just always there in his usual button-down shirt and pants, earnest in his hopes to interest us in algebra and isosceles triangles and whatnot. Seldom was he successful though. But we all knew he was a kind man. Mel went to him when she found out at 15 that she was pregnant. She didn't want to have an abortion, so he helped to arrange for the baby to be put up for adoption after it was born. He helped out Brandon when his deadbeat dad just up and left him without saying a word, letting him stay at his place for a while until the county found him foster parents in our town. From what we knew of him, he was unmarried and had no family to speak of. His parents were dead, and the one sibling he had, a brother, had moved to Canada years ago and not bothered to stay in contact. He had a dog though, and the day it died was the only day any of us could ever recall him calling in sick. That was just the sort of man he was. So imagine our surprise when the police arrested Mr. Lane in our final year. Apparently it was only us kids who had no idea that was coming. Suspicion among the adults had been mounting for some time, especially after the disappearance of Evelyn, the fifth kid in 2 years to go missing without any explanation, and without eventually being found. They were all from our schools, but in different classes. The one thing they all had in common, they had Mr. Lane as their math teacher. When interrogated, he confessed. He brought them to the wooded area near the school where 4 bodies were found buried. For some reason or another, he refused to reveal where Evelyn's body was hidden, though he admitted to killing her. All the same, the prosecution had more than enough evidence to proceed a trial. It made the news, of course, but it wasn't really considered sensational enough to be featured on the front page. There were no lurid details to be savored by the public, much to their annoyance. The voices in his head had told him to do it, he said. He was sentenced to 120 years without any possibility of parole. Just as so done, the convicted murderer faded from the public consciousness. Evelyn's body was never found, and Mr. Lane died in prison barely a year into his imprisonment, beaten to a pulp by a fellow inmate whose niece had been one of the victims. But some things just refused to stay buried in the past. Around a decade after the death of Mr. Lane, teens started disappearing again, but at a brisker pace. 10 gone in 2 months, the headlines of the local paper screamed. Even the national newspaper took an interest this time, for there were dog whisperings of how evil never really dies. Old Miss Graham, in fact, swore she saw the specter of a long-dead teacher turned murderer in the very same woods where he had previously hidden the evidence of his crimes. The hard-nosed detectives at the police departments weren't as inclined to believe that the missing persons were being spirited away by a, spirit. And they investigated every case thoroughly and tirelessly, and soon enough they got a lucky break. Late one evening, a state trooper pulled a car over for a busted taillight. He was just about to let off the driver with a warning when the tiniest cry could be heard wafting from the boot. The driver must have heard it too, for he followed immediately, hurling the officer to the side. The ensuing high-speed chase involved at least 5 patrol cars and a helicopter, and it wasn't long before the suspect was apprehended. The name of the suspect? Brandon Hicks, the very same Brandon taken in by Mr. Lane after his dad had abandoned him. In the boot of his car, the police found his latest victim, Breonna Taylor, thankfully still alive. When pressed on his victim count, he proudly declared 16. 11 in the recent 2 months, not counting Miss Taylor. One of them had not been reported as a missing person case due to her history of running away from home, and 5 more from a decade ago, including Evelyn, whose body was never found. The police was skeptical at first, seen as a deliberate ploy to throw them off balance, but when they found the skeleton key of Evelyn Burrows in a remote spot at the local quarry, just as Brandon said they would, they began to sit up and take notice. The truth shook the town to the core. 10 years back, Mr. Lane confronted his young charge after he had found one of Brandon's shirts, blooded and muddied. The youth broke down and confessed, and begged his teacher not to give him up to the police. For some reason, he agreed, and when things came to a head, he was arrested. Something in him made him decide to be the willing scapegoat for his student. The town folks all shook their heads in disbelief at the revelation. No one could understand why Mr. Lane would do anything like that. Brandon himself offered no explanation. Brandon Hicks eventually was shut away for a long, long time, and after a while, the whole incident faded from memory, an ugly stain on an otherwise clean history the town was eager to forget. But I still think about it sometimes. The man who had never called in sick his entire life doing so for the first time when his dog died, the one living thing he had as a friend. I think Mr. Lane was a lonely man, a very lonely man. May he rest in peace. Mr. Lane was our math teacher in high school. He didn't stand out in any way, and his lessons weren't particularly interesting. He was just always there in his usual button-down shirt and pants, earnest in his hopes to interest us in algebra and isosceles triangles and whatnot. Seldom was he successful, though.